Hi everyone, this is Michael Park for ADOBE Plus, and today we're going to be making a sci-fi title sequence. So I'll just take you through the final product before we get started. So basically what happens is we have text which flies past the camera towards the screen and stays there for a couple of seconds before we fly back into it. It repeats a couple of times for different titles. Here's the second one, and once more for the final one. And then we have the ADOBE Plus logo, which comes together in a similar fashion. What really brings animation to life is the lens flares we're using and the Twitch plugin, which is from videocopilot.net, and it makes the screen shake, blurs the camera, and blooms out the lights. That really makes animation come alive and gives it a lot of energy. So that's what we're making, and let's get started. So first of all, we're going to make a new composition. We'll call it Envato, and using this HD 720 25 frames a second preset, and we'll just make it about 20-second comp, and we'll turn it to half. Okay, so this is our first part of text. If we look at our final comp, we can see that we have Envato Presents. And we have 4 parts. That's the first part. This is Envato Presents, and we'll make that part first. Back in After Effects, we'll create a new text layer, and we'll type in Envato Presents. Okay, we're going to make the Envato word a little larger, maybe 55, which looks pretty good. And we'll center it. And we're going to apply the ramp effect to the text. So just drag that over. And we're going to bring the start of the ramp, the black, down a little, and the end of the ramp, the white, up a little, giving us a top to bottom, a black to white fade, which looks quite nice. If we zoom in and change to full, we can get a nice looking piece of text. We're going to apply a second effect, which is the glow effect. So we'll just get that and drag over. And we get a nice glow, shiny text, and it looks a bit more sci-fi. We'll turn the threshold down a little, maybe say 55%. We get a bit more shine on it. And that gives us a nice looking piece of text to start from. So now we want to animate the text. If we go back to the animation, we can see the text flies in from the camera and comes together. And we're going to do that now. So we're going to use a built-in preset to After Effects in animation presets, in text, and in 3D text. Down here it's 3D resolve position. So we'll just drag that over onto the text, and immediately we can see there's a change. I want to get rid of the layer controls, so I'm going to hold down Control, Shift, and H, and that gets rid of the layer controls so we can see the text easier. Okay, so we've got some of the text moving about, and we've got some blurring going on here. And what we want to do is change that. So what we're going to do is bring down the layer, and in text and animator 1, and we can see our blur is set to 15 and 2. So we're just going to unlink that and set them both to 0. Now we want the text to fly past the camera and come together. So we're going to turn the Z position keyframes right up, maybe 3000. What that's going to do is it's going to cause the text to come together quite nicely. It works pretty well. If we scroll down the range, we can see the offset goes from -100 to 100, and that's what makes the text come together. And the animation lasts about 2 seconds. We're going to make it a bit quicker, maybe under 2 seconds, and we'll do a ramp preview to check that. Okay, so it looks pretty good. We might actually make it a little faster, so we'll just drag those keyframes forward, and that's us done for the first part of the text. We don't need to do anything else. So let's move on to the second piece of text, which reads ADOBE Plus Network Production. Okay, so we're going to make that. So to do that, in the Project tab, we're going to click on the layer and we duplicate it by holding down Control and D. And we're going to rename it to Tuts plus Network. Okay, so we'll double click on that to open it, and we can see everything is exactly the same as before. And all we need to do now is double click on the text layer to select it, and we'll change it to a Tuts plus Network Production. I can spell network. Okay, production. So we're just going to make a couple of changes. We're going to change the word production. We're just going to bring the size down to about 48, and the same for the A to 48. And that makes our Tuts plus network part stand out. Okay, we'll just center it a bit better. Maybe up a bit. Yeah. And if we scroll back, we see our animation is intact. All we've done is duplicated the composition, so that's cool. And we're actually finished our text part for that title. So we'll move on to the next part, which reads Out of This World After Effects Tutorials. Okay, so again, we'll click on the layer and Control D to duplicate it. We'll rename it to Out of This World, and we'll go into it. So we'll double click on it, and we'll change the text to Out of This World After Effects Tutorials. Okay, if we go back to our title, we can see that the bottom line's a bit larger, which makes it stand out. So we'll select that, and we'll change it to 55. Okay, that looks pretty good. But we actually want to change it a little. The glow's too much in the bottom line, so we're just going to bring the ramp down. So we'll bring the end of the ramp down. And that looks better. Again, if we look at the animation, we're fine. We don't need to change anything. It flies on the Z-axis and comes together, and it looks like the final product. And that's exactly as we got it in the final product. So we're done with our text, and what we need to do now is our logo. And if we look at our final render, we can see the logo does something similar, where it's got bits coming together, and then they hit together, and the logo's formed. So it's similar, but not the same. So we're not going to duplicate a layer. Instead, we're going to import by holding a Control-I to import. And we're going to import the A Tuts Plus logo. And it's a Adobe Illustrator file. So let's create a new composition, and we'll call it A Tuts Plus logo. Okay, and we drag that in, and we're going to center it. Okay. So let's create a new composition, and we're going to call this logo. So the reason we're creating a second composition and we're going to put our logo into that is because the effect we're going to apply works on the size of the composition. So we need the composition to be the full size of our output. So we're going to copy our A Tuts Plus logo into our new composition, which gives us a composition of full size. So we can apply effects, another preset. So it's in transitions movement, and it's card wipe 3D swing. So let's have a look at that, and we can see that there's quite a nice transition into the logo. It's similar to what we've done with our text, but we need to make a couple of changes. It's not quite right. There's probably needs to be a couple more elements. So we're going to change the rows to 10 and the columns to 10, which gives us, well, it gives us double the amount of elements. The second thing that's not quite right is that the logo should fly in from the camera and then go to where it should be. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on the layer and click U, and that will show all our keyframes and our effects. And we can see our Z position parameter, which ends at 2 and it starts at 5. So what we're going to do is we're going to click in our expression, and we're going to change this to, say, -5. If we preview that, we can see it comes from the camera, but it's still not quite right. It does start too far away. So we'll change that to -2, and we'll look at that. And it looks better. We might even change it to 0. Or you can play around with this and get it as you want, but maybe let's say -1. We'll finish with that. Okay, that looks quite good. So now we have our logo doing an animation too, and that's the logo finished. So we now have 4 compositions: Envato Presents, a Tuts Plus Network production, Out of This World After Effects tutorials, and our logo. Okay, so let's start working on the main composition. So we'll create a new composition, I'll call it main, and we're just going to put our 4 elements into the composition. So let's just copy in Envato Presents, drag that in, and then Tuts Plus Network, Out of This World, and our logo. Okay, now let's move them all along. So give them each, say, about 3 seconds. So start that at 6 and start logo at about 9. Okay. We want to zoom in and change the end of the compositions. So if we press Alt and right bracket, we can cut the end of the composition. So it's Alt and right bracket in Windows. And we'll do the same for the second one. Cut that to the right size. For the third one, we can leave the logo staying on the screen, that's fine. So if we scroll through, we can see our animation, and it looks fairly similar to our final render. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to create our camera. So let's create a new camera. Just call it camera, and that looks good. Okay. Now to control the camera, we're not going to change the camera, we're going to create a new null object. I'm going to rename it to camera control. Okay. And what we need to happen is the camera control and other layers to be 3D, because they're going to move about in 3D space. And to animate the camera, we need to parent the camera to camera controls by dragging that pickwick. Okay. So now if we go into camera controls and change the position, the camera moves, and that's what we want. And we can also change the rotation, and the camera rotates. Good. So what we're going to do is we're going to animate the Z rotation. So let's start it at about 20%. And we'll, over the course of the animation, let's finish it at, say, -5. So that's going to rotate past the 0 position. We get a nice rotation, and it keeps rotating throughout the animation. Okay. Now let's set a keyframe for the position in terms of the Z and X and Y. So let's say we get it where the animation itself stops. So the text come together at this point, so we'll keyframe that. And we'll move forward, and we'll start the animation. And we'll zoom in on the text, and we'll just move the camera. Zoom in a bit more. Okay. So now, if we click on the layer and press U, we can actually hide all key parameters apart from those with keyframes. If we do a RAM preview, the animation, it looks pretty good. Yeah, that looks quite nice. But we want this keyframe, we actually want it to slowly resolve to its position. So if we click on it and right click and choose Keyframe Assistant at Easy Ease, it means our animation is going to kind of come to a stop at that point fairly slowly and smoothly, which looks pretty good. What we might actually do is bring the camera out a little so that the camera does keep moving. Okay, so what we now want to do is when the next piece of text comes in, we want to zoom in on that. So let's zoom in and move over to the right a little. And let's actually move it a bit to the right more. Zoom in a little bit more. Okay, and change the Z rotation a bit more. And then again, as the animation and the text comes together, say about there. We'll zoom out to maybe 0, where we were. We'll change the X. And then the end of the animation, we'll zoom out a little bit more and we'll change the Z rotation, say 5. So if we check that, we do a RAM preview of that, we can see we zoom out and we have a nice Z rotation, which looks quite good. What we're actually going to do is move the keyframes a little closer together, which will zoom in a bit faster. That looks better. Okay, we'll just repeat. We'll just drag them a bit closer. And again, we'll just zoom in. Okay, and move it over to the right a little bit more. I want to make it maybe 10% on the Z rotation. Okay, go to the end of the piece of text. Sorry, actually we'll go to where the text comes together, bring it back to 0, and then go to the piece of the end of the piece of the text, bring the Z position out a bit, and we'll change the Z rotation to -5, which gives us the animation we want. Drag them forward a little, and finally zoom in into this one. Maybe move it over, zoom in a bit closer. Okay. And when we make it -10, actually -15, that's better. And finally, for the final one, the logo comes together here, so we'll zoom back to 0, center it a little bit more, and a little later, we'll zoom out a little, and we'll change the Z rotation back to 0, so we resolve to the 0 position. We'll RAM preview that, and we'll have a look. And that looks like it's going to be quite good. Yeah, which looks quite good. Okay. We have a nice transition into the logo, which comes together, and then we center it on the logo. Okay, so we've finished animating the camera, and let's keep going. So we're going to make some stars. So let's create a new layer, a new solid. We'll call it stars. Now we're going to make it a lot bigger than the composition size, about 2000 by 1500. Now let's drag it back down to the bottom, and we're going to use the effect called fractal noise. So we'll drag it onto the stars. It doesn't look like stars at the moment, but if we change the contrast up to about 350 and the brightness to about -100, yeah, 150. If we change the scale now down to 4 and we zoom in, we can see these small stars. Okay, so this needs to be a 3D layer, so that as the camera and the text moves, so do the stars. And it makes it look a lot more realistic and a lot better. So we have our stars. So what we're now going to do is we're going to add some planets. For the planet, I'm going to use a planet image I made in Photoshop, but you can use any image you want. And I'm just going to drag it over just above the stars. Now it's quite large, so I'm going to have to scale it down. Maybe not that much. Okay. And we'll position it a bit better. And we're going to make it a 3D layer. And we're going to start it where our second title card starts. And we're going to end it where this title card ends. Okay. Which means it moves with the title, and it looks like the title is kind of hovering in front of it. Right. So what we're going to do is we're going to second copy that. So we'll just drag it in again and make it 3D and start it where our next title card starts. And we're actually going to drag it down a little. We want it to appear like the title card is kind of above it. So we're going to drag it down and scale it up a little. You're going to lose a bit of quality, but it should be okay. I'll just move it below the title card, maybe down there. Okay. Which looks quite good. Yeah, that looks fine. And we'll just end it where the title card ends. With Alt and right bracket. And there we have our two planets. So it's actually also the same planet, but that's fine. And you can add other stuff if you want, but that's what we had in our final render. So that's how I did that bit. Something else we're going to do is we're going to create some blue haze or space fog, I guess you could say. If we look at our original, we can see there's some blue fog around the planet. And it makes it look like there's light emitting from the planet, or maybe there's a star behind it. So we'll just quickly do that. So let's find the right place in our composition, and we'll create a new solid, and we'll call it blue fog. And we'll make it a nice dark blue color. And comp size is fine. Okay. And we'll make it a 3D layer, and we'll drag it just above the first planet. And we'll just move it over into position. Cool. So let's now make the shape of the fog. So we're going to click on it and press T to bring the opacity, and we'll drag that down to 50%, which allows us to see the planet. And we're going to use the pen tool to draw our fog around the planet. Good. So if we double click on the layer, double click M, and if we feather that to 100, it'll make the fog, it'll feather the fog out. And again, Control Shift H to get rid of the outline of the fog. We bring it down below the planet, we can now zoom in and see our fog behind our planet, which is exactly as we want. And it makes the planet look a lot more realistic and makes it stand out, and I guess adds some depth to the composition. So let's start that at the right place as we did before, and let's end it at the right place as well. Okay. And that's our fog for that planet. If we look at our final composition, we also have some fog in our first title card. So we'll just do that quickly. So we'll duplicate the blue fog layer, and we'll just move it to the first title card. Okay. And if we Control Shift H to show our mask, and we'll just move the layer over a bit and click on the mask and delete it. And we'll just draw the two other patches of fog, one there and one up here. Okay. Again, if you Control Shift H and double click on M, you can see your mask in full, and we'll feather it to about 100. And we get, I guess, fog patches. If we set these to 150, actually, we'll feather them out a little, and they won't be quite so obtrusive. Okay, that's our first piece of fog. And if we have a look at our final composition, finally, we can see that around our ADOBE logo, we have a bit of purple haze. So we'll add that now with a new solid. We'll call it purple haze, and we'll make it a purple color. That's fine. Let's make it a 3D layer, and we'll bring it below our logo, and the pen tool, and we'll draw around the logo. Again, this is some sort of haze, it doesn't need to be perfect. You can make it exactly as you want. Let's make the feather 150, and the color is actually not quite right, it's a bit too bright. So we're going to use eyedropper to take that color, which isn't actually quite right either. So let's change that to the other color, the slightly darker color. Yeah, okay, that's good. So the mask is a bit big, so we'll just bring the expansion down, maybe -10. Okay, and it gives us a nice bit of haze around our logo. Again, we want to start at the right place. I actually only want it to really become apparent at this point. So we'll press T to get the opacity, set the keyframe, and a couple of frames before, set the opacity to 0, and that'll mean as the logo comes together, the fog appears. Okay, good. So we're actually nearly done. We've got a couple more elements to add, and the first one to add, well, there are lens flares. So let's create a new solid, and we'll call it lens flare 1. And just needs to be slightly larger than the comp size because of the Twitch plugin will actually make the layer move, and if it's too small you'll be able to see the edges of the layer. So let's make it 1500 by 1000. That should be big enough. And we'll make it black. Okay. And let's move it to just above our first title card. And let's apply the lens flare effect. Right, which gives us a really nice looking lens flare, and the type we're going to use is 105mm prime. And we're going to bring, we're going to first of all change the blending modes to screen, which is going to hide any blacks in that layer. And we're then going to change blend with original up to 50%, and that'll make our job a little bit easier because it'll hide the flare. And if we press Ctrl Shift and H again, we'll be able to see our layer controls. And we're just going to start by moving the center to part of the letter. And we're going to do this for every layer. For every part of our final composition, each title card. So I'm only going to show you the first part, and then you can do the rest yourself. So we're going to keyframe the flare center. And as we move along, as the letter moves, we're going to make the flare attach to the same point, the E. So we're going to have to move the center to where the E is. So we just drag it every couple of frames. I'm using page down to move frame by frame. We're just going to move our flare center to the lower left hand corner of the E. It's kind of tedious and slow, but as long as you do it after making your text and after changing your camera, then you'll only have to do it once. Remember, if you do change your camera after doing this, then you will have to redo your lens flare. But that looks quite good. So we don't actually have to do the whole thing because we're going to bring the flare brightness down once the text has come together. So say when the text is about here, we'll set the flare to brightness 100%, and then as the text comes together, we're going to bring it down to 0. So it's just going to fade out. We'll change blend with original to 0, and we'll see that the flare is attached to the E, and then as the text comes together, the flare kind of dies. Right, that looks like we want it. So now we're going to go ahead and do this for each of our title cards. So we can see that I've duplicated the lens flare and changed it so that for the second title card it's attached to a part of the W, and on the third title card it's attached to a piece of the T here, and it's the same way I did it for the first one. So now I'm going to duplicate it again, and we're going to do the same for our logo at the end. So let's move it along to the right place and click on U to get our keyframes. Select all our center keyframes and delete them. Change blend with original to 50, and we're going to animate the center. Now it's a little different, there's no characters to attach it to, but we can attach it to a part of our logo. So we're going to attach to the bottom logo there, and we're just going to move frame by frame backwards and forwards to make sure it's attached to the same part of the logo. Again, as the logo comes together, we're going to bring the brightness down to hide the flare once the logo is fully together. Remember, we are going to be adding the Twitch plugin, so your center points don't need to be quite perfect because the lens flare will be twitching about the screen. So if it's not perfect, it doesn't really matter. And let's change the blend with original to 0, and we can see our flares attached to our A++ logo, which looks good. So that's us done apart from our final Twitch plugin. So we'll just close off that layer, and we're going to create a new layer, a new adjustment layer, and rename it to Twitch. And we're going to apply the Video Copilot effect Twitch. Now we're not just going to apply the effect on its own, we're going to use an animation preset and one of the Twitch presets, and it's called Chaos Fury. Now you can do this manually with Twitch, but it's just nice using one of the presets. And immediately we can see there's quite a difference. Now before I start using Twitch, I'm just going to say you can do this manually with sliders and expressions and blurs and blooms, but I just think using this simple Twitch plugin is much easier and allows you to do it a lot quicker. So let's change the amount down to 40% and the speed down to 5, which is going to make it twitch a lot less. And if we move frame by frame, we can actually see it twitches quite a lot less. I've just realized I need to turn the flare off because it's currently starting too early, so we'll just drag the start of that over. Okay, so we'll just make this flare start a little later, and that's better. Okay, and we can see there is our twitch having an effect. What we might actually do is change the speed to 6, which will just make it have slightly more of an effect. Okay, and if we go frame by frame, we can see it looks quite good. It blurs it out, it shakes the camera, and it blooms out the lights. And that's exactly what we want. Now we're going to have to animate the twitch amount, because we don't want it to be twitching as our text is fully appeared, because we won't be able to read it. If we look at our original one, we can see it twitches, then it stops twitching, allowing the audience to actually read the text. So we'll do that now. So let's find the point where the text comes together, say about there, and let's keyframe the amount, forward a couple of frames, and bring it down to 0. Okay, so it stops twitching and you can actually read the text. If we click on the layer and press U, we can see our keyframes we've made, and what we want it to do is to twitch as we zoom in. So about here, we'll start twitching again, and as we zoomed in, we'll bring it back up to about 40%. Okay, so as we move in, it does a bit of twitching. It blurs it out a little. Okay. Actually, we might start that a little earlier, which will give us a bit more of a twitch on the way in. There we go, the lights are twitching out, so that's quite nice. And we're moved into our second title. Okay, so find the point where the text has fully come together, about there-ish. Yeah, that's okay. Set a keyframe, and then a couple of frames forward, and set twitch down to 0. Go to near the end, another keyframe, and then where the next title card appears, set it back up to 40. So as we zoom in, we get a twitch. And then we're at 40%, and we're twitching as the text comes from the camera. And maybe here we set a keyframe, and a couple of frames later, let's set one to 0. Good. And we'll give a couple of seconds to read the text, and then finally we'll repeat it. So we'll set a keyframe, and then set another one to 40. Bring that forward a little, which gives us twitch as we move in, and then we get twitch as our logo appears until about here. A couple of frames forward, and we'll set twitch down to 0. So we get a nice twitch, and then the keyframe comes together. We might actually move that forward a frame, so we get a bit of twitching, and then it's fully together as the twitching stops. Okay, so finally, before we render, is we're actually going to bring the slide amount down. So we're going to go into operator controls, slide, and slide amount, and we'll bring it down to, say, 40%. And you can see that that makes the text slide a little later. A little less. The more the elements slide, the more distracting it is. So having a bit less slide gives it still the impact, but less distraction. So we'll render that, we'll see what we get, which is this. So we've rendered it, and we'll just skim through it, and we can see that it's fairly similar to what we had before. We have our different text layers, and it's our third text layer, and then our logo, which comes together. And the Twitch plugin really makes everything come to life and gives everything a lot of impact. And that's basically us. That is our animation. You can have a lot of fun with this, do a lot of different titles and sequences, but for basic sci-fi titles, animation, that's how you do it. So I'm Michael Park, and this is ADOBE Plus. I hope to see you next time.